Why do rich people live longer than poor people? It might sound like a silly question that you already know the answer to. Oh, they have better access to healthcare, right? Well, no. That's not the biggest factor in places like the United States, Canada, Europe, and most developed Asian countries. Instead, there is something more going on here that is less obvious than rich people get treated for all of their illnesses while poor people do not. Now, this is a big deal. Multiple studies have found that the wealthiest 10% of people in these developed countries live around an extra 10 years more than their less wealthy peers. What's more is that they remain disability-free for 8 to 9 years longer than their peers, which means not only are they living longer, they are living better lives. Now, this might sound like a uniquely American issue, but the same top 10% rule has been found to apply to other countries too. Chile is a much poorer country than the United States, but it has a longer life expectancy. That life expectancy is further stretched out by around another decade in the top 10% of wealthiest citizens. So absolute wealth and access to resources isn't the key factor here. With talks about retirement ages being pushed back further and further, this little statistical anomaly should be something that we are all paying very close attention to, because it's actually something we can all learn a lot from. Alright, so everybody that watches my channel frequently will know that I hate dragging out an answer to a question just to get my watch time up. So what is this secret sauce that is keeping rich people alive? Well, two things. The first is actually something they are missing: stress, or at least one very specific type of stress. The second thing is that we might have been looking at this equation all wrong from the get-go. Wealth might have less to do with how long you live than how long you live determining your wealth. Now, the good news for all of you who just got stressed by hearing about how your stress is going to kill you is that wealth is by no means a prerequisite to avoiding this kind of biological time bomb. It just inherently makes it a lot easier. Beyond that, there are other types of stress that mean very little to do with your long-term health. And likewise, there are some factors at play for certain people that massively overshadow this factor altogether. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how it can be used to keep you living your best life for an extra decade. A special thanks, as always, to my channel members and supporters on Patreon for making these slightly more controversial videos possible. Alright, so the first thing we need to look at is how this apparent discrepancy was found, because yes, if you were going to compare the life expectancy of the average American with the average citizen of Sierra Leone, then obviously one group is going to be far wealthier, and that wealthier group is going to live longer on average. But this comparison has less to do with stress and more to do with ongoing conflicts, access to clean drinking water, and a severe healthcare deficiency, especially when considering infant mortality. So yes, in this example, you would be right. Access to healthcare is much more important, but this comparison is not what we are interested in here. Instead, we want to see the differences between rich and poor within advanced nations. To do that, the first place we should look is a 2020 study by the Oxford Journal of Gerontology, gerontology being the biological study of aging. This report looked at a number of factors amongst two groups of over 50-year-olds from both the UK and the United States. The results were that wealth above any other variable was the biggest determining factor in the quality and length of life amongst this group of over 50s. Now, studies like these are really useful because of what they include, but perhaps more importantly, what they don't. By simply looking at people who are over 50, the study was able to remove statistical mortality outliers like most workplace accidents, congenital disorders, and infant mortality. What this means is that the study was able to ignore a lot of statistical noise that comes with dying at an early age and focus on factors that would apply to a broader population. Would a multimillionaire daredevil have a shorter life expectancy than a lower income office worker? Oh yeah, you bet. Of course. But that's not really relevant to most people in the population, and by design, it would not be included here, assuming that is our daredevil is not over 50 years old. This study is also particularly relevant because it looked at both the United States, where access to certain preventative medical treatments will depend on access to health insurance, and the UK, where access to medical treatments is widely accessible through the NHS. Despite what most people would assume is a major factor, the findings were pretty much the same. The richest people in both the UK and the USA lived lives that were healthier and longer by about a decade than the poorest people in both countries, suggesting that healthcare is not the only thing that money can buy to extend your life. So this is where this particular study's usefulness ends. You see, it was a broad study designed to look at what it was that determines life expectancy in broad populations of people. It controlled for extraneous factors and looked at what was left. Overwhelmingly, it was wealth, but this study didn't explain why. There is no logical connection between the numbers in your bank account and the health of your body. Your heart, lungs, and liver don't know what a 401k is, and it doesn't really impact their function. Because of this, most people would assume that there has to be some middleman variable between these two factors. Money can buy you healthcare, money means you can eat better food, more money is a sign of a white-collar job with less physically demanding work, or maybe it's that even more money can buy you a safer, cleaner place to live. All these connections sound reasonable enough. The problem is that the 2020 study, along with a host of other similar studies, controlled for these variables, and still found that wealth was mysteriously linked to our longevity. Well, Stanford professor Dr. Robert Sapolsky and Sir Michael Marmot of the University College of London might have the answer. And it is counterintuitively that yes, your body does actually know you are poor because of chronic stress. Now, I am by no means a Stanford biology professor, so I will leave a link to both of their papers as well as an entire documentary made on this issue if you want to learn more about the biomechanics of it all. But what you need to know as it relates to this question is that people from the perceived lower rungs of society are constantly stressed out over things like debt, housing affordability, bills, and living expenses. Beyond this, people with less wealth are more likely to be working jobs that are not necessarily harder per se, but are much more demeaning. You are much more likely to be spoken down to as a minimum wage retail worker who is easily replaceable, rather than as a senior manager with a very specific set of skills that are hard to replicate. It's a horrible reality, and it absolutely should not be the case. But as anybody who worked in retail or hospitality will tell you, it's a good day when you don't get yelled at by an incompetent manager or an angry customer. Low respect working environments and financial instability also combine with the fact that less wealth means less options. If a financially stable professional is getting constantly abused at their job, they can quit. They have the financial safety net to take a few weeks without a paycheck needed to find a new job. Someone working a minimum wage job does not have that luxury. Now, you might think that this is all wrong. If anything, most high-end jobs are more stressful. It's hard to argue that a trauma surgeon or a trial lawyer is exposed to a less stress environment than a Walmart employee, which is true. But these studies specified that this was all down to a specific type of stress: chronic stress. Chronic stress is the type of stress that is felt constantly. It's a type of stress that comes from waking up after going to bed too late, getting into a car that may or may not start, sitting in traffic for an hour, hoping you get to a job that you hate on time so that you don't get yelled at for being late. It's the stress that you feel when you need to balance out 3 rosters between 4 jobs that only ever give you 5-hour shifts but expect you to be available at the drop of a hat. Chronic stress causes you to stay up until 4 a.m. watching videos on why you will never retire, both heightening your awareness of your shitty situation, while simultaneously making it harder to wake up early the next day to beat the traffic to get to your horrible job before getting yelled at. Chronic stress is the type of stress that comes from knowing that despite working 50 hours a week, you are still seen as lazy and unmotivated by people in society that have had it a lot easier than yourself and have subsequently done a lot more with their lives. Chronic stress is probably what you are feeling right now if any of this is at all relevant to you. And for that, I'm sorry, because this type of chronic stress is what is killing you. Again, I am not a doctor or a biology professor, so I encourage you to read the papers linked below if you are interested in the details. But this type of chronic stress slowly releases cortisol into your body. Cortisol works to shut down the functions of the body that are not needed in a fight or flight situation. You basically just need your heart, lungs, and muscles to be given every resource your body has to offer. This is very useful if you're running away from a lion, but it is very damaging if switched on all the time by comparatively meaningless stimuli. Chronic stress differs from the acute stress, which is much more prevalent in the roles that are more widely associated with being stressful. Yes, a hedge fund manager might experience higher peaks of stress during client negotiations or a friendly call from the SEC. But at the end of the day, they will get back into a comfortable car, take a short commute to one of their amazing homes, and not have to worry about whether they should pay for electricity or groceries. A lifetime of even mild but persistent stress can do enough damage to the body to seriously limit lifespans and reduce quality of life in twilight years. Now, I know one solution to this problem is, stop being poor. But that is obviously easier said than done, especially for people that find themselves subject to this persistent stress most often. A more workable solution for everybody is to make sure you set some time aside every day to simply relax and take stock of what it is that you need to do and how you are going to do it. Another solution is to move to a country with a more equitable social structure. Going back to the examples we explored at the beginning of the video, there are countries and places like Scandinavia, Southern Europe, and even South America which are much poorer in nominal terms than the US. But because inequality is less severe in these places, so too is this chronic stress issue. So yeah, we humans live longer and are less stressed when we are at the top of respective populations, and our position in that population matter much more than how prosperous the population is as a whole. Make of that what you will. Alright. Now there is one last factor at play here, and it is really important to explore because it is a textbook example of the problems that can arise when looking at correlation in statistics. Correlation does not always equal causation, and the causation might not necessarily be in the direction you might expect. So far, all we have been searching for is the reason why being in the upper class leads to longer lifespans, and certainly we have found some very compelling arguments. But maybe what we should be doing instead is asking if living longer gives someone a higher chance of being in the top 10%. Longevity on an individual level is highly dependent on genetics. A family with genes that allow them to live longer, healthier lives will naturally have some major advantages when it comes to the accumulation of wealth. For starters, they might avoid the illnesses that run in some other families that will be costly and time-consuming to treat. Beyond that, having an extra decade with strong health means that these individuals may be able to work longer in the kind of senior roles that tend to go to people with lots of experience. Of course, good genes would not be the only thing that these lucky families pass down to their children. A longer life means that inheritance will go to children who themselves will be middle-aged and financially self-sufficient. This is massively preferable to children who receive their money while in their 20s or 30s, because these younger recipients will be far more likely to squander the money rather than using it to complement their already established personal finances. Studies have been conducted on this relationship, and the results do suggest that a genealogical lifespan can be as big of a determinant of wealth as wealth can be a determinant of lifespan. Now, these studies were smaller and narrower than the ones that we looked at earlier, but I hope it gives you a better understanding of how statistical relationships work next time that someone gives you an article or talks about some study with some new wild relationship. A great example of technically correct data being presented in a very misleading way can be found with all the talk around the Great Resignation. If you are scared about the headline saying that 40% of the workforce is about to quit their jobs, go and check out that video and see why it's always important to read beyond the headlines. I want to again thank my new patrons and channel members for continuing to make it possible for everybody to keep on learning how money works.